Cool. We should be good now.
Don't mash one. Don't mash one. Oh, so those instead. And then put that folder, the mesh plus, put the whole thing in there, assuming you want it. And then you start with search. No. I think you can just unblock it while you're in there. Like go into the, like you can still find your Windows unblock.
Oh, in the folder.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, I unblocked all. Yeah.
Okay, we should have everyone in the room in Zoom. Everyone in the room and on Zoom, were you able to get the plugins installed? How's that going? It's good? Okay.
Oh, the Weaverbird? Yes. They're cool. Oh, yeah.
Okay, is everyone able to see the screen on Zoom? Yeah, cool.
Technically. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you want to put it's in the top. Well, not unblocked. I did actually. Oh, it has to. You don't like drag into a folder. You double click it and it'll install. That's it.
RJ, did you invent Weaverbird?
I did not, but I wish I did.
It's disappointing.
No, I believe that is an Italian man that invented it. It's a cool dude. It's quite an old plugin, but it's very, very useful if you work with meshes in Rhino. So I do enjoy it. Okay, it sounds like everyone's got the plugins good now and Grasshopper open in here. For today, just make sure we should have all of these plugins. Mesh Plus and Weaverbird are new today. We've used Pufferfish, Dendro, Shortest Walk Kangaroo in the past, so you should have those. But if you don't, let me know. So for today, we'll be mainly using Pufferfish as the main plugin to create our work. Mesh Plus and Weaverbird will help out in the end, but Pufferfish is the main thing we'll look at today. And in specific, we're going to look at twisted boxes using Pufferfish today. So if you're not familiar with the term, which it's not a common term, it's just in Grasshopper, but to explain basically what a twisted box is today is we'll be starting with some kind of base mesh. It could really be anything. I'm going to draw this pyramid. And basically what the twisted box will do is allow us to array any type of geometry. But we can do a lot more than just array it in a line or do a polar array like around a circle. Is anyone familiar with arrays before? Yeah, okay. It's in every other 3D software. Twisted boxes, though, is a little bit more specific. Basically, what the workflow will be is with whatever base geometry we set, we can draw a bounding box around this geometry. And with that bounding box, we can use that box to morph this original geometry into different shapes. So what we're going to make today is a sort of necklace, and that's going to exist around a line. So say we have this line and we want to array this mesh around the line, but also maybe we want the line to be thicker in some areas. What we can do basically is draw boxes that start changing shape. And then what this will do is it'll take the original mesh and it'll morph it into these new box shapes. So we can be pretty creative with how the shape is forming based on how we define the twisted box. So I'll show quickly what that looks like in Grasshopper. So this is what I drew, but in 3D. Let's zoom into that a little bit better. So if you imagine like one section of this, kind of this part right here, that's the original base shape. And we've just arrayed that around this curve and then also pulled it and pinched it in certain areas to be a little bit more creative with how the pattern is being applied to this twisted box. And it's not a crazy complex process. It's pretty simple. We can do a lot with it, but we'll try to get through the basics today and understand like how this is working. So to start today, the best thing to do will be to use that base mesh from last week, just that person mesh that we had, and we can use this to create the necklace around them. I'm going to make a necklace sort of thing today, but feel free to make whatever shape you want, as long as it's kind of like a ring shape. It should follow this process pretty well. Okay, so let's open up that base mesh file. And again, opening up a new file. I like to work in perspective mode at all times, just because it gives a better sense of 3D. And if you want to get into that mode, again, if you just double click the word perspective, it'll make that the entire screen. So in the past couple of classes, we've worked solely in Grasshopper for most of our work. Today, we'll kind of use Grasshopper and Rhino at the same time to start making a shape. I'm not sure if the question's been asked before, but why would you choose to work in Rhino versus why would you choose to work in Grasshopper? Or why might you do some work in Rhino and some in Grasshopper? And it really comes down to what your outcome, what your goal is. Today, we'll draw the bounds of the necklace in Rhino with curves, just because it'll be a lot quicker and easier to manually edit these curves and move them around. But if for some reason you were working on a project where you needed the curves to adapt to maybe the input mesh of the person, say you're 3D scanning someone and you need this necklace to change shape based on whatever scan you put in, everyone's different, you might want to draw the curves in Grasshopper because that way it would auto adjust the curves based on this input mesh. Today we don't need that, we all have the same character in here, so we can draw in Rhino with curves and just keep it a lot simpler today, because drawing curves in Grasshopper would be like a whole class on its own. So first thing to do, the easiest way to draw on a mesh is to actually use the vertices of the mesh to draw the curve. And the best way to do that is to actually have this character in Rhino itself. Right now it's just in Grasshopper, so if we were to hide this, it would go away. But what we want to do is bake this character into Rhino itself so we can see the mesh. And to do that, this person is in this component in Grasshopper, but we can bake it. So if you right click and just hit bake, it'll put it in Rhino, and we should be able to see, and you can just hit OK on this. You should be able to see all of the lines, the edges, the faces of the mesh itself. And if we were to preview off the component, then the character is going to stay in Rhino, which is perfect. So now we have all of the vertices of that person accessible. Right now it's in wireframe mode, so we can see the wireframe. It's a little bit confusing to work this way just because we can see through the character. So if you come down to where it says perspective, we can change it from wireframe to shaded, and then that'll actually shade all of the faces, and it looks a little bit more realistic as a 3D model at this point. So is that working for everyone? You have it in Rhino? Cool. So now we actually want to draw the curve on the person. And to start, the first thing that you'll want to make sure is turned on is this button down at the bottom here. On Windows, it's at the bottom. If you're on Mac, I think it's at the top. But it's on this bar at the bottom with all the words, and it's just the button called OSnap. And we'll just want to make sure this is enabled. What this will do is it'll allow us to, as we're drawing in Rhino, it'll snap our cursor to certain aspects of what's in the scene. So if you turn that on, you should get a little menu that comes up with a lot of boxes that we can check to turn different things on. On Windows, it's over on the left. On Mac, it might be at the bottom. But important thing here is we'll want to make sure we have points turned on, make sure you have vertices turned on or checked, just to make sure we'll be able to select those things in Rhino. If you just want to turn everything on, that works too. But we'll see why this is important in a second when we actually start drawing the curve. So just make sure you have points, vertices, edges turned on in there. Which actually, this is the actual menu. So everyone find that menu? All right. So you turned on OSnap button at the bottom. Okay. Yeah, you could toggle it. You could also, if you right click on OSnap, there's an option to show the panel. And that might give you some options that come up. You got that? No?
No, I just turned it into a mesh again.
Turn it into a mesh.
Well, it hollowed it out again. Changed the viewpoint.
Oh, it changed it like back to wireframe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so with all that turned on, we can actually start drawing the curve now. So you can use any curve tool you want. In my case, I really like to use, if you press the drop down on the curve tool, the second one here is called interpolate points. I like this one a lot more than the first one just because it'll follow exactly the points we set. The first one will kind of best fit between all the points, so it's not as exact. So I like using this one. And when we have this tool, we'll notice that as we hover over the character, we can see our point, just as I move the mouse, will start snapping to points on the mesh. If it's not snapping to the points on the mesh, it might be snapping to the grid plane 1,000 miles away just in the distance. It's hard to tell just because our screen is 2D. But it's very important that we can see it kind of snapping to those points as we move around. If it's not doing that, then probably one of your options is turned off. So just make sure you have vertex turned on for that, so you can snap to mesh vertices. So in this sense, for the twisted box, the workflow we'll be doing, it requires 4 curves to make the box in between. So the box has 4 points on the square. So we need 4 curves to make the box in between. So I'm going to go around and draw 1 curve around the neck and then duplicate that 3 times to make all 4 curves. And then we can edit those 4 curves to make whatever shape we desire. In the case of this workflow, I'm going to make an open curve, so I'm not going to close it off at the end. I would probably recommend to do the same just so the workflows match up, but I'm going to start in the back, and you can start anywhere just by left-clicking on a vertex, and that'll start to make a line. And then once you started, we can orbit around and place more points, and orbit and then place more points as we go around the neck. The points don't have to be mirrored. You can really put them anywhere. I'm just trying to get it as close as possible. So I'll let you have a minute or two to draw any curve you want. Once you're done drawing a curve, though, make sure once you've set down your last point, just hit enter, and it'll enter that curve. If you hit escape, it'll delete all of the points you set. So make sure you hit enter when you're done. The curve might go inside the character, but I swear it is there. If you click on it, it'll show up yellow, and you should be able to see it through any mesh. Is anyone having problems starting with the curve tool? Okay, so if you've got a curve set, the next thing we'll do, as I said, is duplicate this to make 3 more curves to fill out all 4 corners of our box. Before we do that, though, something that is nice that we can do in Rhino to make this a little bit easier for ourselves is we really don't need to have the points accessible anymore from the mesh. We're not going to draw any more curves. We're just going to start duplicating them. So you'll notice if you try to select your curve, you might also accidentally select the mesh just because they're right on top of each other, which can get quite annoying in the next 5 minutes when we start moving the curve around and editing the control points. So one thing we can do to fix that so that we can't select the mesh anymore, it's nice to have it there so we can see what we're doing, but we don't want to have to select it every other second when we don't mean to. So what we can do to fix that is put the mesh on a different layer and then lock that layer so we can't select that layer, and then we can move on with editing the curve. So in order to do that, there's a layer panel in Rhino. It looks like a red, white, and blue kind of cake slice. It's usually in the right side of the screen, might be at the top. But if you can find that layer panel, there should be a button that allows you to add a new layer. I think by default, we have the default layer, which is just everything. But if we make a new layer, we can put the mesh on that layer and then lock that one. So we'll do that. You can name it anything if you want, or just keep it as layer 1. It's not going to matter. So once you've made that layer, if we select the mesh that we want to lock, we'll want to move it onto this layer. Right now, everything is on default. But if you select the mesh, right-click on the mesh layer that we just made, and then we can hit the button called Change Object Layer. It'll move the object onto this new layer that we just made. If you're in Rhino 7, the button might be a little bit lower than it is in Rhino 8. But it should be the same lingo, Change Object Layer, and it'll move it onto that layer. So once we've done that, the character mesh should now be on that layer. And we've got two options. We can either turn the view of it off with the light bulb, but it'll be nice to have it on so we can see what we're doing. But we can also hit the padlock button, which once we lock it, we can't actually select the mesh anymore. Even if we drag, it'll only select the curve, which is on its own layer, on the default layer, which makes the scene really nice because now we can't select the mesh. So that's good. Everyone able to do that? Yeah. Cool. So now that we're at this point, we'll duplicate this curve 3 times. The reason why we're duplicating it, you could draw another curve, but there's a couple things to think about if you were to draw a second curve. Is first, the best way to work is to start the curve at the same place you started the last curve. So if we started the last curve on the left side and went around to the right, if we were to draw another curve, we'd want to do the same thing because the directionality of the curve is going to matter. If we drew the second curve kind of the other way from right to left, then the twisted box would be confused as it tries to match points up, and it's going to think the start point is now over on the opposite side, which isn't going to be great. The other thing is the amount of control points you add, so the amount of times you clicked on the mesh to make the point. If one curve has 6 control points and the other has like 50, that might also get a little confusing. So if we're just duplicating the curve we already made, then we know we're not going to have any of those issues because it's going to be the same curve, just duplicated. So you can either Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste it, or you can hold the Alt key while moving one of the arrows. So either way works. If we hold Alt, we can hold Alt, move the arrow, and then that'll automatically duplicate the curve. Very similar to Photoshop or Illustrator. If you're duplicating, you can just hold Alt to duplicate things. And in this sense, I can draw a little picture, but what we're planning on doing is having the original curve that we drew that goes around. And then the next curves, again, we want to form like a box. So we can draw the second curve up on the neck, and then maybe the third and fourth can come out really. Then we fulfill the requirement for the 4 curves for the 4 corners of the box. So this is what we're going to try to do right now. And we'll just duplicate, and then we'll edit the control points. So let's do that. So I've duplicated it once. When you're in this state, you could scale it with some of the scaling tools, move it around if you want to. This is a lot easier than editing all the control points because that'll take a little bit more time than just scaling. So now I've got two curves in this. I'll duplicate this one and maybe stretch it out pretty wide. Again, you can make any edits that you want. And then I'll duplicate it a fourth time. So you should end up with 4 different curves in the scene, similar to this, but scaled however you like. So I'll give you a few minutes just to do that. You can either Control-C, Control-V, and then I'll copy-paste Alt while dragging one of the arrows. That'll automatically duplicate it in that direction. Yeah. On Mac, though, it might be Control or a different button. I'm not too sure. Yeah.
When moving them and scaling them, is there a way to turn off like the sort of snapping between points?
Yeah, so you probably have this button called Grid Snap turned on.
Yep.
If you just turn that off, it'll fix it.
Is it okay if the shape that it ends up making is like not really that much of a box? Because I have kind of like a 4-sided, like 1, 2, you know, an almost vertical 3 and then a 4. So
yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to stretch it a lot more in a second here.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Yep. I see some people starting to work with the control points. So if you've got the 4 curves, I'll just go on to the next little part here. We can do a lot more than just scaling and moving the curves around. If you click on any of the curves, you should notice that these kind of white points and dotted lines come up. We're able to grab any of those points, and with the same gumball tool, we can start moving those points around and really, you know, creatively directing how these curves fit around the shape. So again, you should be able to move these however you like to get basically a silhouette of the necklace. So we're just going for like a mass model here, the outline of the shape. And we'll use this in a second to fill in with geometry, but just for now, get to some silhouette that you enjoy. And it doesn't matter how crazy the lines are, the box should still work just fine because we have duplicated the curves. So everything should line up.
How do you add a point again if you want to add a point onto the curve?
Yeah, so if you want to add a point, most of them exist under this control point menu on the left-hand side in the standard toolbar. You got a couple options here. So I think the best would be this insert control point button, and that should allow you to just hover over the curve and set a new point on there. You could also add a kink if you wanted like a hard point there, but I think just insert a control point will keep it soft.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, how do we get the translation and rotation arrows again on the points?
Yeah, so if you're not seeing all of this coming up when you're selecting, if you come down, at least on Windows to the bottom here, there's a button called Gumball. If you turn that on, you should be able to see the arrows, the squares, and the rotation and scale tools, if that is the question.
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm going to see.
Does it matter if the lines overlap, or do they all have to remain in same like different planes?
It shouldn't matter right now. Everything will still work. But once we get to the end, you can make the decision for yourself if, I guess, it looks realistic enough to exist physically, like 3D print, basically. If things come to like an intersection point where there's no volume, that might be an issue, but it also might be like desired. So it's really up to you. Everything should work fine though, no matter what you do.
So no mistakes. That's what you're saying.
It's set up where whatever curve you make should work as long as you've duplicated it, like we did earlier. But you can make any edit you want to it, and the twisted box, I mean, it's pretty elastic, so it'll fill in what we have. Okay, so as you're drawing the curves, once you finish drawing curves, or at any stage really, if you don't want to see all these control points cluttering up the scene, we can come back to this control point menu. And if we hover over this option, kind of the black line with 2 points, we can see it gives us 2 options here. So what it's saying is left click will turn all the control points on, which is what we have currently. And if we right click on this button, it'll turn all the control points off. So that'll just visually clean up the scene. So again, if we had these curves, we could turn, we have control points on when we select it, and then if we want to turn them off, if there's too many in the scene, we can just hit this button, right click it, and that'll turn points off. Just a visual thing though, it's not going to affect the workflow at all. Cool, so how's everyone doing drawing the curves? We had a good point. Yeah, cool. Okay, so once we have the 4 curves, you can probably expect what we'll do next, but we need these 4 curves in Grasshopper. They're not going to serve us much just being in Rhino. Does anyone remember how we take any geometry into Grasshopper from Rhino? Yeah? Nice. Yeah, exactly. So Yeah, for the people on Zoom that didn't hear that, if we ever want to add anything into Grasshopper, we can use any of these primitive options right here that correspond with the geometry. In our case, we have a curve. So if we type in curve, we can get that curve primitive. And in our case, it'll be great if we have 4 of these curve primitives, 1 for each curve. We could, as you said, set multiple into 1 component, but you'll see in a second why we need 4 of them. The next component has 4 inputs, so it's just easiest if we have 4 inputs to give it. Okay, so you all probably remember how to set curves, so you can go ahead and do that. One thing I will say, though, is the next step will work, but it'll work best if you select the curves in a certain manner. So either select the curves. We've made 4, if you imagine clockwise or counterclockwise. We should set the curves in that manner. So if we have, say, just a section cut of 4 curves going around the neck, say if this is the head right here, we'll want to select them going around in a circle like this. And then ending, well, we actually won't select the last one a second time, but select them in this order. If you start selecting them kind of go this way, then that way, then that way, then if we try to make a box like that, it's going to be a real weird box. So select it in the shape of a square. I know your curves are probably stretched out and stuff, but if you imagine it simplified, just kind of select them in a square as you do all 4. Does that make sense? Nice. Yeah, so I'll do that here to show. So I'll start with this inner one, set that. Then I'll go up the neck, select the second one, and then go out to the highest one I have here as the third. And then the last one coming back down to the one that sits on the clavicle and just select that one last. It doesn't matter, just, yeah. And just to show on the screen here, you don't have to do this part, but say we were to loft all these 4 together, we'll want to kind of see it kind of sweeping around, making one continuous shape. And this will actually be probably better visualized with this. So we can see how all 4 curves are in a line and they make a nice shape here. If we were to do this in a different way, say the second and third were switched, now my loft is kind of going in and out of the surface. Like it has this intersection point right here, which is not great. So I'll flip that back to in order, and we can see when it's ordered correctly, we've got a nice flow going around the whole piece. So that's one way to check it. The twisted box in the next step here is pretty much going to do the same thing, but it's just going to draw the box in this kind of in this direction, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if the curves are in the wrong order, it's not going to draw the best square. It's going to draw a really weird square. So hopefully that makes sense for that. We're not actually lofting though. We are creating a twisted box. So once you have those curves internalized, we can start typing in twisted box. These components are all from Pufferfish. There's probably 20, 30 different ways you can make a twisted box with Pufferfish. So we'll want to select the one that is useful for this situation. And that's going to be the twisted box sweep. So this one right here, the twisted box sweep, it needs 4 curves, which we have, and it'll kind of sweep in the same way I did that loft a second ago. So it'll go around in a circle to make a really nice box. So we'll grab that one. So if you have the twisted box sweep component, you'll see that it has rail 1, 2, 3, and 4 as the first 4 inputs. And those correspond to curves 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have all that, we can plug that in. plug that in. We should see something very close to the sketch that I made at the beginning of class coming up. So we have the 4 rail curves as black, and then we have the red squares on the inside making up twisted boxes or cells in here. I'll just pause here. Is anyone having trouble getting this to work?
I'm having a little bit of trouble. I have
Yeah,
pufferfish, but I can't find the twisted box sweep option. I have other ones, but not that one.
interesting. If you go to the pufferfish tab, can you see all of these twisted box options?
Under what did you click? Surface?
So pufferfish up top,
Yeah.
and then right below that, there's a tab called twisted box on the right side.
Oh, no, I don't seem to have that.
Which ones do you have?
I mean, I have the pufferfish tab, and I
Yeah.
have up until vector.
Okay.
But I guess
Wait.
just no twisted box in between vector and transform.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That is weird. Did you download the most updated pufferfish? Because I mean, they should all be there because it's just one file in the components folder. So if this one is unblocked, which it seems like it is unblocked because everything else is working, I'm just curious, if you go into your components folder, like what does this .gha file say? Because 3.0 is the most up-to-date one.
Yeah, I have 3-0. I mean, I see it because I'm looking through the extracted folder. I see it in the subcomponents. So just bring all those over to them probably.
Yeah, the sub B ones. Yeah.
Okay. I'll restart this.
Okay.
I'm sure it'll work.
Yeah, maybe it'll come up. It's very weird that you're just missing one drop down.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure it's fine. We'll just relaunch it.
Okay, so if you're getting your curves to work, you might be wondering, maybe not, how do you control how many twisted boxes are in this setup? And we've got a couple more inputs for that. The one right below the rails is going to be the parameters. So this lowercase t controls how many boxes and where these boxes are within our rails. The easiest way to start manipulating this is going to be creating a range component. You'll see if you hover over this list by default, it's got values between 0 and 1. So basically what it's done is it's taken the 4 curves, reparameterized them to be within a domain of 0 to 1, and now we're cutting up and making boxes at each of these points. So a box at 0, another box at 0.06, all the way up to 1. So the easiest way to control this is with a range component. By default, this range component, if you hover over the domain, you can see it also exists within 0 to 1. So both of our ranges align, which is great. And then the n input is just the number of steps. So if we look at the output of range here, we've got a very similar list, 0 to 1. Just the decimals are slightly different in this setup. You can see we do have 11 numbers. That's based on the number of steps. So if we use a slider, and you can make this however big you want, I'm going from 2 to 100. We can use this to control the number of steps in the range. So now we step twice. And if we use this range as the lowercase t value, that'll in turn control how many boxes we have in the twisted box. So if you drag this number up, it'll match your interpolated curves a lot more exact. And if you go down, you can see it gets pretty faceted as it hops in between the different numbers. And we're not going to get into it today, but you don't have to have an equalized range of numbers. You don't have to go 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 up to 1. You could do something skewed like 0, 0.1, 0.2, and then 0.8. And you'd have a really big twisted box in between 0.2 and 0.8 if you want to mess with this list of numbers even more. But today we'll keep it just normalized. We'll keep them all the distances in between equal. You also see another input here called weighted. This one isn't going to do much, but you could put a true-false value in here. It'll slightly change how this is mapping, but it's not going to be a big deal today. So we'll need a shape to actually put in the twisted box. From my drawing earlier, I made a pyramid, but we're going to do something a little bit more interesting today, and that's where Mesh Plus comes in. So that's one of the other plugins we downloaded. If you find the Mesh Plus tab, under this drop-down of volume here, there's a lot of different pre-made shapes, and all these shapes tessellate on each other. So if we had an array, in this case we have a 2D array, so we're just stacking one box next to another box. It'll fit in that way, but it could also fit in a 3D array, so we could put shapes on top of each other, and each right side will align with each left side, so forth and so forth for all the different faces of a box. So if you have this, you can use any of these presets that you want. I'm going to use the Batwing one. This is the same one from the preview that I gave at the beginning of class. So with these, any of these components, the shape itself is going to populate down at the origin of Rhino here. Right now it's not showing anything because we actually need to fulfill this very first input here, which is going to be the boundary to put this shape inside. Basically just a rectangle to map the shape onto. So it's really easy here. We don't even have to do much, but if we just grab a rectangle, just the most basic rectangle you can from Grasshopper. And we can add this rectangle just into the G0 input. And we can see now that, don't mind the feet of the character, but if we look in between, we've got this Batwing shape mapping within the box that is drawn from this rectangle. And it doesn't have to be, I know we're doing twisted boxes. The shape that you put in, it doesn't have to be a cube per se. It can be any shape within a rectangle. But we need to define the starting box to morph to the ending box, which is going to be the one we just created up here. So in order to create the starting box, we can just do that with a simple component that we've used probably many times before, but that's just the bounding box. This one will give us a box that best fits around the shape that we have. In this case, we have a mesh from this Batwing component. If we add that into the bounding box, you see we'll get a very simple box being formed around that shape. So now we have three different things. We have the mesh, we have the twisted box up top, and we have the bounding box of that Batwing shape. So this is kind of the part where we see if everything worked as it should. And we can use a component here to combine them all together called morph to twisted box. This will take our original shape with our original bounding box and morph that into the new boxes that we made for the necklace. So with this component, you can see it has those same three inputs. It's got geometry, the reference box, which is going to be the bounding box, and then the twisted box, which is going to be the target twisted box that we made, so the necklace. So what we want to move the shape into. So we can start fulfilling these, the first one being geometry, so the one to morph. The second being the bounding box, so the one that wraps around the shape from Mesh Plus. And then the last one that ties it all together is the twisted box. Once we plug that in, we should see that shape from Mesh Plus now populating the necklace that we made. And it's pretty low poly at the moment. It's very, very simple. But that's nice because we can play with the scale of it and see what fits without it bogging down our computers. So now that the shape is filled in with something, we're actually like filling out the silhouette. If you aren't happy with the shape that you have, it's really easy at this point to start moving points around, and you can see the twisted box will adapt to any of our changes in real time. So you can make whatever you want. I don't know. It's interesting. Okay, so at this point, we have the mesh inside the twisted box. The one thing is, if we're gonna, say we want to 3D print this shape that we've made that's inside the twisted box, we actually want to make a physical model of this. There's a couple steps that we'll have to do to actually get to that point. The first one being, if you hover over the output of the morph, we'll see that we have a bunch of separate meshes, which isn't great. We'll aim to have one watertight mesh that we can actually 3D print that has volume to it. Right now, this is just a lot of surfaces together. So the first thing is going to be to actually merge all these meshes together. And we can use a component called mesh join, and that'll take however many meshes that we have, as long as the list is flat with all the meshes in it, which it should be. Let me zoom back in real quick. So if we add those two together, the mesh join should be outputting a single mesh, which is just everything combined. Just to note though, the meshes are not welded together, if that matters to anyone. Right now they're just together as a mesh, but they're not welded. So the vertices that touch each other are not actually combined. They're just sitting in the exact same space. So the next thing we can do is weld it, and I'll just draw this out really quick. So say we have two meshes, one in black, the other in red. And right now this is kind of what we have. There's two shapes sitting up next to each other because of the twisted boxes. And right now each of these has vertices. So there's vertices here and vertices here. But these vertices are not the same vertice. There's a black one and there's a red one. So right now these meshes are separate. Once we weld them, what that'll do is it'll take any vertices that are sitting in the same spot, and it'll just make those vertices the exact same vertice. So now we just have two vertices instead of four. So at this point, now the red mesh and the black mesh are one mesh. They're actually combined together. We've welded that seam shut. And we can do that very easily with another component from Weaverbird. So we're going to bring in Weaverbird now. And there's one called Weaverbird's Join Meshes and Weld. We've already joined them, but we do want to weld them at this point. So we'll grab that. So this component has two inputs. The first one being the mesh itself, and then the second one, the W, being a Boolean value asking if we want to weld them or not. So we can plug the mesh in to start, but by default this weld is turned to false. So we'll just want to make this true. And we can do that with a Boolean toggle, as we've probably done before. So if we plug those together, just turn that to true. Now we have one mesh, and that one mesh is welded. Let's see. So you can kind of see that this is working, because if we look at the mesh before the weld, we can see the vertices are near 600. And if we look at the one that's coming out, we can see the vertices are now near 500. So we've welded about 100 vertices together, which makes sense for this workflow. So if the welding is working properly, we'll see in the next step here. So we've used Weaverbird to weld them together. But the strong point of Weaverbird is going to be these smoothing algorithms that it has in here. There's a lot of different ones that all do slightly different things, but the one we'll look at today is the Catmull-Clark subdivision. Catmull-Clark is, you can see the description there, two mathematicians from 1978 that wrote an algorithm that does smoothing. So we'll use that. We can plug the meshes together. And what this is going to do is it's going to take our original mesh, which had, in my case, about 430 faces. It's going to add a lot more faces in between. So we went from 400 to now 1700. So it's added a lot more faces, but it's also kind of averaged out the position of all those vertices. So it's smoothed them out. And now we have kind of soft curves around the edges instead of these harsher edges that we had a second ago. If it did not weld, then you can see a slight difference as we switch between the two. If it's not welded, it'll smooth out the intersections between the meshes. So we still have 18 separate smooth meshes, but if they're actually welded, we can see that those connections are now out at those connections. Way. Okay, so now we have like a smooth mesh, but it doesn't have any volume yet. It's still kind of a surface. How many people have Rhino 7 versus Rhino 6 in here? Does anyone have Rhino 6? Okay. You have 7? Okay. So let's see. So the next step would actually be to make this thick. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. One of the ways, which I've done in the past, is to actually take the edges, and you don't have to do this part, there's a better way. You could take the edges of this, and say you had a lot of edges, you could put a pipe on all those edges and then merge all those pipes together to make a thick, a thick mesh there. It's one way to do it, but the reason I asked for Rhino 7 versus Rhino 6 is Rhino 7 has this really, really nice component called quad remesh. It's a pretty powerful algorithm that'll take any mesh and it'll remesh it, so it'll take the original faces and make a new set of faces that are all square, or they all aim to be square. And that just really cleans stuff up. It cleans up topologies a lot. It's a really nice component to use if you're ever cleaning things up. But we don't really need it today. I believe that's only a Rhino 7 thing though. Rhino 6 does not have that. If anyone has Rhino 8, there's an even better one called Shrink Wrap that is only in Rhino 8. Also really cool, but not necessary for this. What I will say what we could do today is, since we have a mesh, there's a really nice component in Pufferfish, which we've installed in the past, called Offset Mesh. So what this will do is it'll take our mesh, it'll take all the faces, it'll offset them based on some distance, and it'll also make it solid. So it'll add the faces to bridge that gap between the offset mesh. So we can use that. So this one's got a couple inputs. The first one being the mesh. So we can plug that in from the Catmull-Clark subdivision. By default, it has a offset distance of 1, which is a little big in our case. So we can make that smaller with a decimal slider. So we know 1 is too big, so we can go smaller than 1. And just see at what distance does it look like it has thickness, but not too much thickness where it will just become a blob and not retain any of the detail that we had. So you can add whatever value you want there. If you look at the other inputs though, we can see this one does both sides, which if you want to have an even offset on both sides of the original mesh, you could do that. And then the last one here, create solid. This one is important. By default, it's true, which is perfect because we want a solid mesh. If it was false, we would just have 2 surfaces. So the solid mesh is good. So at this point, we do have a mesh. So we could see this, what this looks like in Rhino if we were to bake it out. And this is what we have. The mesh itself, it's still pretty simple. There's not a lot of faces. And we can also see there are some intersections here as well as surfaces go through other surfaces. So even though we do have volume now, it's not perfect for 3D printing because we don't want to see any of these self-intersecting faces. Not the best. The printer might get a little confused. So we can use my favorite method in Grasshopper, which is the plugin Dendro. And this will clean up any self-intersecting surfaces, anything bad with the mesh, and really make it high quality for 3D printing. So we'll do that as our last step here for this final one. So we've used Dendro in the past. So if you remember from before, cool. If not, I'll go through it quickly again. But we'll use Dendro anytime we want to like merge or smooth things in a voxel space. And to always start, we'll need to define the voxel scale. So the size of those little boxes it's making for the voxel. So we'll always need to start with the create settings from Dendro. So with the create settings, if you remember from the past, we'll always have a slider, and the slider will define what the detail scale of the voxels are. I usually always like to start between 0, 1, and positive 1. So I'll grab a slider for that. Again, always for this, I like to start the slider all the way up at 1 before we plug anything in, just because the higher the number, the lower the detail, but also the quicker it's going to run. If we start this at 0.01, that's going to be super high detail, and it might just crash Grasshopper. So it's not best to start there, but we can refine this number and see what works best once we start plugging things in. So we can hook that up, the voxel scale, to the number slider. And then to actually combine and smooth this mesh, we'll want to convert the mesh to a volume. So we have a component for that in Dendro called mesh to volume. So grab that. And then mesh to volume only has 2 inputs. So it has the mesh input, and then it has the Dendro settings input right below it. So we have both of those. We have the mesh and we have the settings. So we can plug those together. And coming out, we should see a Dendro volume on the output of the mesh to volume. Doing this, we're not sure what the detail looks like just yet. We need to do another step before we can see what the volume looks like in Rhino. So the next one we can add, right now it is a volume, which is nice, but it was a little jagged before. It'd be nice if this was smoothed out a little bit, so we couldn't see kind of the faces of the mesh. It's not great when you 3D print and you can see the physical faces of the STL that you made. So we can smooth that out, and Dendro does have a nice component called smooth volume in the filter section. We do have a volume coming out of the mesh to volume, so we can run that into the smooth. And then that'll do what Catmull Clark kind of did in Weaverbird to smooth it out, but this one is working for the Dendro volume and smoothing it much more. So once you have this plugged in, it'll be best to, at this step, only be previewing the final thing that we have. So in this case, the smooth volume. Right now, I can't see what the smooth volume looks like because everything else is previewed on and it's kind of over top of what I want to see. So I'm just going to select everything and preview that off. So just turn everything off so we can't see anything except for the smooth volume.
Yeah, mine was just not there.
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Ooh.
So if it's not showing up, that's totally fine. Yeah, keep in mind that we did the voxel scale super large, so we have basically no detail at this moment. We've taken the really cool necklace we made and made it into either invisible or a blob, which is a start. But it's good. As long as your computer didn't crash, like that's where we want to be right now. So. Okay. Are you just running on the Mac OS?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, that's probably the issue. I think Pufferfish works on Mac OS, but I think Dendro needs Windows for that step. Yeah, so if you have Parallels or VirtualBox or any other partitioning thing in the future that would work. Okay, at this point, if you don't see it, your creation is probably a little bit smaller than mine, or you just have a smaller range value, so there's not a lot of stuff packed in there. But at this point, if we start moving this number slider down towards 0.1, don't go all the way to 0.1 though, like off rip. Like you're probably just gonna crash it.
It's still alive.
It should come back. The reason I set up the slider like that is you could do a slider from 0 to 1, but if you just slide all the way to 0, that's gonna be really bad. So 0.01 is gonna save you. It shouldn't die on 0.01. But yeah, I go down just, and you'll get used to this. I go down slow until I'm like looking to see what the detail is. And it's kind of difficult to see the detail when it's translucent like this in Rhino. One thing you can do in Grasshopper is there's this little orange and white circle up in the top right. This is going to be our display settings for Grasshopper. If you click that button, you'll get this little menu that comes up. And we can see it's got two options, normal or selected. So normal is when you're just not selecting a component. And then selected is when you select a component, it turns green. You're probably pretty familiar with that. But for the normal one, we can move the alpha value just to 255, so all the way up. So there's this orange sphere in the top right. Yeah. And now we can't see through it, so it's a lot easier to see what the detail is as we move this slider. I mean, for me, 0.06 looks pretty good. But kind of anywhere in this range looks pretty good. So is everyone able to see something now in Dendro? It's not just a blob or invisible. What's your setting number at? Yeah, well, is the slider at like 0.01 at this point, or? Okay, yeah, I'd probably go down to 0.1 or below. Yeah.
Is it 0.07? It's still like more liquid, I guess. So there's just like more shape to it.
Yeah.
So like little floating bits.
Did you use the Batwing or did you use something else?
I used the Batwing.
Okay. What was your range at on the original, like the slider for that? .6. Wait, the slider for the range? I don't think you can do a decimal. Yeah. Yeah, just the one that goes into the twisted box sweep from the very first thing. Yeah. Okay. And what was your offset mesh value? Because if the offset mesh is too thin, you might get like little floaties and disconnected stuff. That's pretty big. I mean, I think big is fine because there should be more mass to deal with.
As I bring it down,
Okay. I mean, I'm assuming you didn't do anything to the smooth volume. The smooth volume has an I value for iterations. You could smooth like 100 times and it would kind of get like, make it super smooth to the point where there's nothing left. I think by default it's at 1. So let me come see.
I mean, you might just need a smaller shape. It's just got like way more liquid. Under the span.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it looks like it was wrapping up around.
It is, yeah. It's just, I feel like that's what it should be here.
Oh, yeah, I think the reason why I'm that is because the doctor instead of condition, transparent side. And I think the shape is just kind of
Which, I mean, if you'd like to, you could. I'm not sure what the order is. Yeah, I was just curious as to why it like doesn't match. Right. I think that would be.
No, it's not. I'm trying to go for like super villain.
Medius seems like this would fit my, the name Medius? Yeah.
And just, you can make your own shape too, like you can model fancy shapes and put them in the bounding box. But you know, that takes time. Crazy.
I am.
Yeah, make them wild. We'll do some screenshots at the end of class again.
Could you please zoom out on the grasshopper so we can
Yeah,
see more
totally,
of it?
Victoria. Yeah, how's that?
That's good, thank you.
Cool.
I changed the shape from halfway to Medius. It's in mesh. And my clues are so cool. I guess it is sort of small. Ooh, this one's done. Yeah. Well, this one isn't actually that cool.
Okay, how's everyone doing? You got the smooth volume working? Cool. So at this point, the shapes are really cool as I walked around. There's still a volume though, and we can't print a volume. It wouldn't export as anything. I don't even think we could actually, you can bake it, but I wouldn't recommend baking the smooth volume. So we'll have to convert it. What? I've just been baking. Well, you definitely can. You definitely can.
She's been baking.
Yeah, you can bake at this point. There's just not a way to control like the detail of the mesh coming out, because there is a component in Dendro that'll convert it back to a mesh, and you can control a couple things. So you can bake however you want. I'm not going to stop you, but this is the method I would recommend. So yeah, if we come back to this convert, there's only a few components in Dendro. All of them do a lot though. There is one called Volume 2 Mesh that'll do the opposite of what we did before. So we'll get back to a mesh at this point. You'll notice this one also has two inputs, a volume and a settings. So we have a volume, which is cool, but we'll also need settings for this to work. And we could use the same settings as before, but it really doesn't matter what settings we use. Most of the time I like to just use a new one and plug that in. There's not a lot to edit here. You don't have to put anything in if you don't want to. You could though, if you change the adaptivity and make it a lot smaller, you'll get more faces on the mesh, but it's a very niche thing. I can kind of show. So we'll go between 0.1 and like 0.05. So if you notice that if you're printing this, maybe you can still see some faces, you could lower this number and get a little bit more faces at the sharpest points. So you can see it's changing around this area. So that's kind of the only thing I would ever mess with, but you really don't have to put anything in there if you don't want to. But at this point, we have a mesh. And we can bake this one out and compare it to the mesh from a few minutes ago. And if you switch it into Arctic mode, that'll show you the view without any curves on it, or without any edges. So we can really see the detailed difference between the two. And remember, there's a lot you can do to change the shape. We can go back to Mesh Plus and we can put in a different input shape. You can do something other than Batwing to get a different vibe, which would be fun. You could also make whatever shape you want. In Rhino, you could grab a sub D and just go crazy and make some shape and put that in the twisted box. You could make a surface, just like Mesh Plus did, put that in the twisted box. We could also play around with the offset mesh, make it thicker. We can play around in Dendro with these settings, and we could really play with the smooth volume. You could smooth it a lot more. There's some other filters in here that you could play with, offsetting the volume or eroding the volume, smoothing it more. A lot of things you could do here. So has everyone got something interesting that they like? The last thing we'll do is maybe just add some color to it before we do a screenshot today to end off class.
I'm sorry, could you zoom out again?
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll keep going here just to finish off for today. I know some people said they were going for some supervillain vibes, so we can add some color to it to maybe enhance that just before the screenshot. We weren't able to get to this last class, so it'd be nice to look at it now just real quick. But we should all have a mesh at the very end, which we will need to add some color to. Right now it's just red, at least on my screen. So we'll do this with a gradient, so we can do some gradient effects on this mesh to make it look a little bit more interesting. We can start off with this mesh colors component. And what this will do is we have a mesh. We just have to define colors for each vertex in the mesh. And we can define that however we want. But I think the easiest thing, the coolest thing to do right now would be to use a gradient to define those colors. So in this case, and this is all just Grasshopper stuff, so no plugins for this. But if we type in gradient, Grasshopper does come with this gradient. We used a swatch last class, so just a single color. That can only do so much. The gradient, we have a lot more control over all the colors. We'll just need to define which vertice on the mesh gets assigned to which color on the gradient. And I think an interesting way to control this would be to actually use one of the curves that we have from our original 4 curves. It could be any one of the curves that you have, but we can use this one as the starting point for the left color. And then as we move away from this curve, we can get to the second color. So right now, by default, we have this pink hue, which will work for a second, but we can change this as we move on. But in order to do this, as you know, we'll grab a curve again, just to apply this curve into our workflow. So we have our mesh, we have a curve that we can start the color at and gradient it away from. So as I said, this mesh color works on vertices, so we'll need to find all of the vertexes of the mesh, and then we can start applying distances and colors based on that. So to start with that, we can deconstruct the mesh. So we'll grab that component. What this will do is it only has one input for the mesh. This will show us all the vertices of that mesh. So we can see all of those here in this list. It might look pretty messy in Rhino. We can preview this off. We don't need it turned on right now. It's not going to visually show us anything that we don't already know. After that, we can use, let's see, this component called curve closest point. What this will do is we have points, we have the vertices of the mesh, and we also have that curve, the input curve that we use to control the color. What this will do is we've used the closest point component before, where we had 2 lists of points and we found the closest point in between the 2. This one just works with a curve and with vertex points, and it'll find the closest point on the actual curve. So I think in the past we might have broken up a curve into points and then used the closest point component to find the closest one in that set. This one takes out that step and it just uses a curve to find a point on a curve. So with that, we're also getting the distance value of the point to the curve, The curve closest point with both of these inputs. Interesting. And you have like vertices in this list. And it said failed to collect. Yeah, it said failed to collect. Interesting. And the curve has a curve in it? No? Okay. Cool. Okay, so we have the distances. One thing to note though is the gradient, just like most things with a range of values with any lowercase t parameter, is it's always going to be between 0 and 1. So if we have a vertice that has the number 0, it's going to be this light pink. And any vertex with the value 1 assigned to it is going to be this darker red. But if we look at our distances, at least in my case, mine's going between maybe 0.5 and 3.9, which is not 0 to 1. Really easy to fix this problem though, so we can get this lined up. And we can use this component called remap numbers. And we might have used this in the past, but what this will do is it'll take a list of numbers. So in my case, it's maybe between 0.5 and 4, and it'll remap it to a new domain. And we'll want that domain to be 0 to 1, because that's what the gradient component's going to like. It's going to like values between 0 and 1, just by default. So we have those distance values to start with. So we can plug those into V. And we'll want to take them from their starting domain and morph them into a target domain of 0 to 1. So target by default is 0 to 1, which is perfect. But the starting domain by default is also 0 to 1, which is not our starting domain. But we can find that very easily with a component called bounds. This will take any list of numbers, and it'll tell us what the lowest and the highest point in that list is. So we can plug the same distance values into here. And in my case, we'll see that we can see the domain actually in this case is almost 0 to almost 9. So good to know. And we can use that as the starting domain. So we know where we start and we know where we want to end. And it'll take all our values and remap them within that new domain. So now everything is within 0 to 1, which is perfect. So with that, we have all these new values. So we have a number, or a floating point number between 0 and 1 for every one of this 120,000 vertices, which is very similar to the lowercase t from the start of this tutorial, so the twisted box. We had the same thing, 0 to 1, to define where the boxes go. In this case, we're just defining where the colors go with a lot more points. So we have those 0 to 1. We can plug that into lowercase t, which assigns a color to every single vertex. So now that we have colors, we can add that into the mesh colors. So now I zoomed out a little bit so we can see that original volume to mesh that has our necklace in it. And we have the colors. We've defined where the colors are going. We plug that in. And now I'm just going to turn off this one so we don't see the dendro anymore. And if we plug in the volume mesh to the mesh colors, I'm going to turn off this one too. Now we should be seeing that color gradienting away from that curve. And now at this point, we can move the sliders on the gradient to kind of change where that color sits. And again, this could be on any curve. So if I wanted to change it, I could just set a different curve and it would change where that color sits. And the gradient component itself there's a lot in there. There's a lot of different presets that we can use. By default, it's got this pink one. But we can do all the colors and map it like that. Or we could do black and white, kind of have a zebra effect. Or like a heat map, maybe. Are these colors working for everyone? Anyone having issues with mapping the colors? So we can also change any of the colors in the gradient. So if you right click on any of these nodes, we have the option to change colors. So we can go and edit that to whatever we prefer. We can also drag them around to different positions as well. Okay, so how's that working for everyone? Everyone got that? Good? Cool. Awesome. Well, at this point, just like last class, if you want to take a screenshot and put it in the homework channel, that'd be great. Just to see what everyone's working on, because I saw some cool ones earlier. You can take a screenshot just like doing any screenshot on your computer, or you could do the view capture to clipboard command, which will get rid of the background. And you can choose whatever resolution you like. In my case too, I'm going to make another layer just to hide those original curves so we don't see those. So we can preview those off. We can preview off all of this work as well.
Hey RJ,
Yeah.
can you share your finished Grasshopper file so that we could kind of upload it and kind of play around with it as well and just kind of, you know,
Yeah,
use it that
totally.
way as well.
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, I'm going to post the file right now in file. Wait, actually, let me just internalize these before I do that. Okay, that should be up there.
Thanks.
Yep. Oh, this one's fun. Colin, which preset did you use? Actually, I don't know who Colin is, but
I forgot which one it was.
nice. Looks really cool. Color's awesome. Ooh. Was this one just smoothed out a lot? That's fun. Nice. These are awesome. I'll get out of this. This one's crazy. How did you get this view?
Oh, that's just the front view.
Oh, interesting.
To like a normal perspective.
Oh, okay, fun.
Screenshot of it.
That's crazy. Okay. Very organic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, nice. Wait, who? Christian.
Yeah, that's all I can do.
Oh, I see. No, it's very interesting. Whatever happening in the back, there's like a lot more, it seems, back there than in the front.
Yeah, I didn't know what was happening.
Very
there,
interesting.
But it did make it.
Yeah, no, awesome. I love the gradient between like the large stuff and then the really tiny squish things. Nice. Ooh. What is this? Are these similar? Are these?
Yeah, this is the same.
Yeah. Okay. Fun. No, the colors are really cool on that one. Ooh. I see some supervillain possibly. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
That's perfect. Which mesh plush did you use for this one?
That one was let's see. It was, what is that one?
Nevious.
Oh, Nevious. Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Looks, yeah, very Nevious if that's an adjective. This one's wild. I don't even, who did this one? Yeah. Okay. Did you just have like a lot of twisted boxes or?
Nah, just off the mesh. I had just 101 without that.
Oh, nice. Okay. Cool. Yeah, it's super dense. Nice. Well, awesome. Yeah, I hope that was interesting. Before we end, I know you all, I don't know if you enjoyed the first one, but you thought it was easy. So I have another one now. Let me find it. It's probably still easy. Where is... I have the second one. Try it out. Let me know what you think. I think it's some, what is it actually?
Oh yeah, it has to deal with Voronoi stuff. So hopefully it's just a, like it makes sense from our past Voronoi work, just 2D and 3D Voronoi cells. So that's that one. Let me know what you think next Tuesday on that one. If you have any questions, as always, just put them in the Discord. But other than that, that's all I had today. So a little bit early, but enjoy your night. Yeah, see you next week.
Thanks, RJ. Have a good night.
Hey, you're welcome. Night. See ya.
Oh, can I ask a quick question, RJ?
Who was that? Want to ask a question?
Oh, yeah,
Oh.
no, that was me. Sorry, I'm the guy who had some issues with the twisted box.
Sure, sure.
So I tried reloading it, and I mean, I took a snip, I guess, of the error message. You're just saying it has loading errors for, like, I mean, just a ton of the twisted box and other,
Yeah.
I guess, objects. I don't know if that's a common thing. I can probably try to figure that out, but
Could you actually, let me stop this real quick. Could you share your screen?